In 1938, when Sturges was still a contract writer, Paramount commissioned him to adapt a story the studio had bought, something called Two Bad Hats by Monckton Hoff. He inherited the project from another writer, Jean Bartlett, who already had put her hand to the job. When the film starts, you're going to see Monckton Hoff's name in the credits. He even won an Oscar for Best Original Story. But the fact is, Sturges followed his usual procedure when told to adapt a piece. He simply tossed out everything the other writers had imagined, except for a name here and the detail of the setting there. Now, in 1939, Sturges's producer sent him a long memo about the script, but he set it aside after he won the privilege of being able to direct The Great McGinty, the first writer-director credit. He threw himself into that production and didn't return to the Monckton adaptation, the idea that would become The Lady Eve, until August 1940, after The Great McGinty had come out as a triumph, and his next film, Christmas in July, was on the verge of its own successful release. I'm telling you all this because when you watch The Lady Eve, you might perceive something that goes beyond the brilliance, energy, and sheer nerve in Sturges's first two films as a director. He's now got the self-confidence of having proved himself. He's also got the assurance of having two top-ranked stars as his leads, Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda, a luxury he had never had before, and actually would never have again. I don't want to exaggerate. He directed stars later, and of course he directed his stock company, and he directed people who were maybe not stars, but were, in the case of Eddie Bracken, one of the most brilliant physical comedians ever to be on screen. But to have Stanwyck and Fonda together, that's really something. And I don't believe the luxury softened Sturges any, but it seemed to have enabled him to relax into making the most romantic of his comedies. It's a romance about the virtue and honor to be found in con artists, the stubborn nastiness that can lurk beneath the good manners of people who are wealthy and high-minded, and the joys and sorrows of revenge. But for all of that, it's a romance. It's also his only film that allows the main characters to escape a fate that runs through virtually all the other films. Everywhere in Sturges's work, characters encounter the horror of going round and round in the same situations. You can see this in the flashback structure he used so often, a structure in which the movie, in effect, ends exactly where it began. You can hear this, too, in Sullivan's Travels, when the main character, miserable and frustrated, says there must be a universal law that says, as you are, so shall you remain. In The Lady Eve, the heroine and hero, in fact, wind up right where they started. And then, as if by a miracle, they're released from the circle. We pause a moment while I try to turn the page. One more observation about who is released from the circle. The first time I saw The Lady Eve, I was astonished and delighted by Sturges's playful way of mapping his story against the book of Genesis. This is literally a story of a woman called Eve, a man, an apple, a snake, and a fall, and a fall, and a fall, and a fall. 6 falls, if you keep track. And that's what the slapstick that Henry Fonda has to endure. But I was puzzled too. You'll notice that the biblical parallels disappear in the second half of the film, or they seem to. Only the name of Eve remains. I'm not going to give you a whole spiel about what I think is happening here, because I doubt Sturges would have wanted a spiel. But if you want to dig into biblical myth, and also some of the cultural atmosphere around Sturges when he was a young writer, you'll find that he almost certainly knew about the myth of Adam's first wife, Lilith, the one who was innocently and joyfully amoral, and how she differed from the later temptress Eve. It is something of that nature happening in this movie. That's something I'm going to leave you to decide, so I made up my mind, because I've now used up my promised 6 minutes. I'm grateful to you for permitting me to throw out a few preliminary ideas. Now it's time to get down to business, or rather pleasure, and watch the Lady Eve. In case you're curious, it's my favorite of them all, so I congratulate you on your good taste in these.